In this video, we are going to see how to prepare for IAM, what would be the questions that would come up from the IAM module in the examination. Let's start by looking at IAM in terms of its subdivisions. We have users, we have groups, we have roles, policies, federation, single sign-on, and so on. All these form the part of IAM, and questions appear from all these subdivisions. So let's look at each one of them individually, starting with the users. The first thing we have to remember about users is when you create a user, the user generally starts with no privileges. So we have to attach certain policies which give privileges to the user. So remember that user always starts without any privilege. Now for each of the users, you can enable multi-factor authentication. That is one way of ensuring higher level of security. We also create admin user most of the time, and that's a best practice. The user that we log in as or with our email ID, that is known as a root user. You all know that from the module of IAM that you would have seen. Now that has all permissions, including the account information, whereas the admin user has all rights to perform all the activities, but does not have control over the account information, in the sense that the admin user cannot look into billing and do anything with billing. There is also power user. Now power user has all the rights but does not have the right to do anything with IAM itself, that the user cannot create other users and so on. Now when a user gets deleted, the keys associated with the user also get deleted. Keep that in mind because that may sometimes appear in the question, in the exam. Now we come to groups. As you all know, groups are something which are very important when you want to create a lot of users and put them all under the same permission levels. That is, if you say that you have around 15 people who you want to create users and give the same permission. Let's say they are all backup administrators and you want to give all of them the same permission. Then of course you create a group and push them all into that group so that you don't need to individually give permissions for people. So that's why groups are used. Important things that we need to understand about group is the groups cannot be nested. That is, you cannot add a group to another group. You can only add a user. And at most, user can belong to 10 groups. So a user, you can add the user in various groups, and at most the user can belong to 10 groups. Now come the policies. Policies are very important, as you know, because we have to attach policies to the users, policies to the groups, policies to roles, and so on. They dictate what permission every user has. The policies are user-based policies when you do them in IAM. So in IAM, you give a policy to a user or you give a policy to a role, but there are also resource-based policies that are used. For example, there are policies which are used for S3 buckets. That is a resource policy. Now, how does the evaluation happen? See, the evaluation happens this way. First, the user policy is checked, and if the user has permission to perform an action on a particular resource, then the resource policy is then checked. If the resource also allows the user to perform the action, then the user can perform the action. That's how it goes. First, the user policy is evaluated, and then the resource policy is evaluated. Now, assume you have added a user into multiple groups, and there is a conflict between the policies given in two groups. So in one group, there is a deny for the user to access S3 bucket. In the other group, maybe there is an allow, which allows the user to access S3 bucket. Now is this conflict resolution happen. The conflict resolution happens the following way. Normally, when nothing is said in the policy, the user is denied any action on that particular resource. Nothing is said in the policy. That's called as an implicit deny. In a policy, we generally give an explicit allow, that we allow the user to perform certain activities like getting the list of buckets or putting an object in a bucket type of a thing. We allow. This is called as an explicit allow. Then there is an explicit deny, where in the policy we deny that the user can do any activity or certain activities. Now, the explicit deny will always takes the precedence. So explicit deny is given the first preference, followed by an explicit allow, and finally the implicit deny. So the explicit deny here, as I said, takes the precedence whenever there is a clash between various policies for the same user. And policies are such, again, you would have seen there that you can block users coming from a particular IP address and so on based on our policies. Now, roles are the most important topic in IAM. Now, every exam that I've attended, there is at least one question which comes on roles. So you can rest assured that there's bound to be a question on roles, whether you're taking the associate exam or the professional exam. Roles are something that you must be fully aware of. Now, you can go back into the module that we have and go through roles again to understand what roles is thoroughly. But basically, roles are nothing but policies which are attached to trusted entities. Now, this ensures that you don't need to store your access key or a secret key in a public place. So, in the example, in our modules, you would have seen how a role has been given to an EC2 instance, and any command from that particular EC2 instance to access S3 was allowed even though no credentials were stored in that EC2. That is because the EC2 is playing a role, and that role allows EC2 to access S3. Roles can also be used to enable cross-account usage of resources. So another account accessing resources of your account, say your testing team account accessing a bucket from the development team. Those sort of things can also be done using roles. So roles is very important. Once again, I tell you, go back to the modules, have a look at it, understand them thoroughly. You're bound to get a couple of questions, and if you know them thoroughly, you'll get them right. All these roles, the number of users that you can create, the number of groups that the user can be part of, all this, there are certain limits. And I've given you the link here where you can go in and check the limit on all of them. Some limits I've listed here, like number of users in an AWS account is 5,000, number of roles is 1,000, and so on. Number of MFA devices per user is 1. So keep this in mind. I'm not too sure how many of this actually comes up in the exam, because these numbers keep changing often in Amazon, but it may not do you any harm if you remember some of the important ones here. And another important aspect of IAM, which you may get some questions, is about federation and web identity federation. Here, these are two things. One is you can use your company's identity provider, that's IDP, to log in into AWS. Basically, you use the SAML 2.0 protocol here. And the use cases are basically to allow users in the organization to make AWS API calls without having to create users in the management console. That is, you don't need to go to the management console and create users. Instead, you allow users to use the AWS API calls using the federation method. You can also write your apps, say mobile apps type of thing, where the user can go ahead and authenticate with a well-known web identity provider like Facebook or Google or Amazon. Here, OpenID standards are used for that. So here is a illustration of what happens during federation. What happens during federation is that you request the LDAP store or your identity store of the company, give that the username and password of your user, and if that user is authenticated, then a client program, a client app will send a request, what is known as a simple token service or STS, using a SAML assertion, and there will be a return from STS. The return will have a temporary security credentials. Now, using this temporary security credentials, the user can then start using the AWS API calls, or in other words, the user can start accessing the AWS resources. So understand this diagram well, and this will be very helpful in your exam. So that's what I wanted to tell you on this, and thank you very much. Hope you have a thorough knowledge on IAM. It's going to be very important. Thank you.